Hello and welcome to Otten Math. In this edition of Otten Math, we're going to take on some practice problems involving complex numbers. All right, so number 1 and 2, we're going to solve the equation. X squared is equal to negative 25. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I end up with x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 25. All right, well, now I can rewrite that. I know that the square root of negative 1 is going to be I. So I can rewrite this as the square root of 25 times the square root of negative 1. I know the square root of negative 1 is just I. And I know the square root of 25 is just 5. So I can rewrite this as plus or minus 5i. All right, second problem, I have negative 4x squared plus 20 is equal to negative 6x squared plus 12. Again, my strategy is to isolate the x value. I'm going to add 6x to both sides, and I get 2x squared plus 20 is equal to plus 12. I subtract 20 from both sides. I get 2x squared is equal to negative 8. I divide by 2. I get x squared is equal to negative 4. I take the square root of both sides. I have x is equal to, remember, plus or minus the square root of negative 4, which is the same as x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 4 times I, and that's equal to plus or minus 2i. Right, in our next problem, we're asked to provide the absolute value of the complex number at point A. Well, if I take a look, here is the origin. I go 2 units to the right and 2 units up. So it's the absolute value of 2 plus 2i. Okay, 2 plus 2i. And remember that my absolute value z is equal to the square root, we're just using the Pythagorean theorem again, 2 squared plus 2 squared. So the absolute value of z is equal to the square root of 4 plus 4. The absolute value of z is equal to the square root of 8. And if I factor out a 4 here, it's going to be equal to the square root of 4 using my product property times the square root of 2. And I have the absolute value of z now equal to simplified 2 root 2. All right, last couple of questions. Determine the answer for the complex number in standard form. And then I do some special things with my kids in order to enable them to enter some answers electronically. Well, let's just go through this as it is. So I have I minus 5 plus 6i. So if I were to distribute the value, I have I, remember, minus 5 minus, or distribute the negative sign, minus 6i if I were to take off the parentheses. And that ends up being I minus 6i would be minus 5i. And in standard form, I have minus 5 minus 5i. Second, I'm going to multiply these two values together. And I want to rewrite this in standard form. So I'm going to write this as 1 plus I times 2 plus 5i. And I get 1 times 2, which is 2. Now the outside, 1 times 5i, which is plus 5i. Now the inside, plus 2i. Now the last would be I times 5i, or plus 5i squared. So I have 2 plus 7i plus 5i squared. Remember, I squared is just square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, which is equal to negative 1. So I have now 2 plus 7i plus 5 times negative 1, which is the same as 2 plus 7i minus 5, which is the same as minus 3 plus 7i.